Something important is unfolding beneath the quiet surface, even if nothing around you seems to show it yet. If you have been sensing this recently, it is not simply your mind creating stories. A final and deeply emotional decision has been slowly taking shape inside their heart, and in ways they can no longer avoid. Your presence has become part of that decision. On the outside, they may still appear calm, distant, or emotionally reserved. They may seem like nothing has changed at all, but beneath that calm appearance, something they buried long ago has become too powerful to stay hidden. A truth they spent a long time avoiding now feels heavier than the effort it takes to keep ignoring it. This is not only about missing you, it goes much deeper than that. It is about what your connection awakened inside them, and what it forced them to recognize about themselves. Quietly, something has been changing within them for longer than anyone realizes. Even if nothing looked different from the outside, a deeper awareness has been growing, and it is now changing the way they see everything that happened between the two of you. Stay with this, because what comes next explains why this shift matters more than it first appears. For a long time they believed that distance would slowly erase their emotions. They filled their days with work, routines, distractions, pride, and long periods of emotional silence. They convinced themselves that if they stopped feeding the connection, the feelings would eventually disappear on their own. But not every connection follows that path. Some remain quietly alive in the background, even when ignored. They continue existing beneath daily life, waiting without making noise. The more they tried to push those emotions aside, the stronger they seemed to become, not through dramatic moments, but through a steady and quiet presence that refused to leave. Now they have reached a point where looking back no longer feels like a choice, it feels necessary. They are questioning the story they repeated to themselves for so long. They are beginning to wonder if they misunderstood what this connection truly meant from the beginning. Instead of fading away, the memories have become sharper. They return more often. They carry more emotion. They are becoming harder to dismiss, and much more difficult to explain away. Keep watching, because this quiet change is leading them towards something they never expected to face. A deep emotional shift is happening inside them right now. One part of them feels naturally pulled toward you with a calm but powerful force that never completely disappears. It is not loud, it is not dramatic, yet it remains constant. Another part continues resisting that pull, because accepting it would mean facing emotions they avoided for a very long time. It would require honesty. It would demand vulnerability. It would also mean letting go of emotional walls that once made them feel protected. Now they find themselves standing in the middle of this inner struggle, trying to understand why your presence still appears so naturally in their thoughts. They notice how thoughts of you arrive during quiet moments without warning. They notice how your memory shows up without effort. They also realize that nothing else fully replaces what they experienced with you, even while trying to move forward in different directions. That realization has become impossible to ignore, and once that awareness grows strong enough, pretending nothing exists becomes much harder than facing the truth itself. This is often the stage that comes just before real clarity. It does not happen overnight. It builds little by little, until the mind becomes too exhausted to keep separating feelings from reality. The inner resistance slowly loses its strength. The emotional walls begin to crack. If they eventually come back, it will not happen by accident or because of impulse. It will come from realizing that what they shared with you held a depth they have not been able to find anywhere else. And if they decide not to return, it will never mean you were lacking in any way. It will simply mean they were not ready for the emotional honesty and personal growth this connection demanded from them. That difference matters more than most people understand. So avoid chasing answers or trying to force an outcome. This situation is unfolding in a way that does not respond well to pressure. Some truths only become clear when they are allowed to develop naturally. There is still more beneath the surface than either of you can fully see right now. What matters most now is allowing space for that clarity to grow without trying to control every step of the process. Inside them, a heavy emotional journey is still unfolding. This is not a passing moment of confusion that disappears after a few days. It reaches much deeper than that. They are slowly facing parts of themselves they once avoided, because those parts felt uncomfortable and uncertain. Every memory, every quiet moment, and every unanswered feeling is helping them see this connection from a different perspective. Whether they admit it or not, something inside them has already begun changing. Once that kind of change begins, returning to the old way of thinking becomes very difficult. The heart starts asking questions the mind can no longer silence. That is why patience carries more power than pressure right now. Let the process unfold. Let the truth reveal itself in its own time. Sometimes the biggest turning point happens quietly, long before anyone speaks a single word. And when that moment finally arrives, everything that once seemed confusing suddenly begins to make complete sense. It is not just a passing emotional conflict. It is a much deeper inner struggle that has been quietly growing beneath everything they show to the world. One side of them is pulled by memories, comfort, familiarity, and a feeling of belonging they cannot fully explain. It is a quiet force, but it remains steady. The other side is guided by an inner voice built from old pain, past disappointments, and the fear of being hurt all over again. That protective voice keeps telling them to stay guarded. It reminds them not to become too open. It pushes them to keep emotional distance because distance feels safer than vulnerability. It tries to shield them from possible pain even if that protection also keeps them away from something that could truly matter. Right now, both of these forces are active inside them at the same time. The tension between them is becoming harder to ignore with every passing day. Even if everything looks normal from the outside, something important is happening underneath. Keep listening, because this hidden battle explains much more than you may realize. In everyday life, they may still appear completely fine. They stay busy. They focus on work, responsibilities, routines, or anything that keeps their attention somewhere else. They may even act as though nothing is affecting them on a deeper level. But inside, avoidance is no longer working the way it once did. What is pushed down does not disappear forever. It waits, then it quietly returns, often stronger than before. The thoughts come back when everything becomes still. They appear during quiet evenings, peaceful mornings, or moments when there is nothing left to distract the mind. That is because the real struggle was never outside of them. It has always existed inside their emotional world. And now that inner world is asking for answers instead of excuses. Whether they wanted this moment or not, they have reached a place where something inside can no longer stay unfinished. The silence itself has started asking questions they can no longer avoid. Without either of you fully realizing it at first, you became an important turning point in their life. Something about this connection reached places inside them that had been carefully protected for years. It touched the part of them hidden beneath controlled behavior, beneath emotional walls, and beneath the identity they created to feel secure. Now they are standing before a choice that cannot remain unresolved forever. They can continue living as the version of themselves that avoids emotional risk, or they can move toward a more honest and open version of who they are becoming. That new version feels unfamiliar. It asks for courage instead of control. It asks for openness instead of hiding. Most of all, it asks them to experience feelings they usually spend so much energy trying to avoid. That is why this process feels so demanding. It is not simply about another relationship. It is about becoming someone different from who they have always believed they needed to be. And once that change begins, there is rarely an easy way back. This emotional process leaves them feeling drained because it constantly pulls them in opposite directions. You may have noticed it already. Moments when they seem close, followed by sudden distance. Times when they appear open and connected, only to pull away without warning. From the outside it can seem confusing, but many times this is not about manipulation or mind games. It is what happens when someone genuinely feels something powerful but is frightened by what accepting those feelings would require from them. Desire and fear begin living side by side. Hope and hesitation exist together. The person becomes trapped somewhere in the middle, unable to move fully forward or completely walk away. As this continues, the stories they once told themselves slowly begin to fall apart. They can no longer convince themselves that what they felt was small. They can no longer pretend your presence was temporary or unimportant. Little by little, they are being pushed to see this connection more clearly, while also seeing themselves with greater honesty than ever before. Stay with this, because the next stage changes everything. Old memories now return, carrying much more emotional weight than they did before. Moments they once overlooked suddenly feel meaningful. Small conversations, simple smiles, ordinary details. They all begin taking on new importance when viewed through fresh understanding. Every shared experience returns with stronger emotion. Every period of silence feels heavier than it once did. Every moment of distance now carries questions instead of certainty. This discomfort is not happening by accident. It is part of the emotional process itself. Real decisions rarely come from continued avoidance. They are born when someone finally faces what has been hidden for far too long. There comes a time when uncertainty becomes more exhausting than the truth. That moment is slowly approaching for them. Not because something dramatic has changed outside, but because inner conflict cannot continue forever without reaching some kind of resolution. Deep inside, they no longer fully believe the story they kept repeating to themselves. They once thought these feelings would fade with time. They believed ignoring them would make them disappear, but something within them no longer agrees. That growing awareness is bringing everything back to the surface once again. Feelings like these do not simply vanish when left alone. They remain alive beneath the surface, growing quietly, returning in waves during peaceful moments, especially late at night, when there is nothing left to distract the heart from what it has been trying to say all along. They also notice it during quiet pauses in the middle of the day, when the usual distractions are no longer strong enough to keep their thoughts occupied. Without planning it, they realize how often you enter their mind. It happens naturally. It happens without effort. Your presence still feels familiar inside their inner world, almost like a gentle background feeling that never completely fades away. Even when they focus on something else, a part of their awareness quietly finds its way back to you. Your absence has played a much bigger role in this process than either of you may have expected. By stepping away, you created the space where they were finally left alone with their own thoughts. That silence became a mirror. It reflected everything they had avoided for so long. Feelings of attachment, regret, unanswered questions, a deep sense that something meaningful was left unfinished. When they truly experienced the emotional weight of your absence, they stopped treating it like something small. Instead, they began comparing what they lost with everything else around them, and in that comparison, the emotional depth of your connection started standing out more clearly than ever before. Stay with this, because the next realization changes the direction of everything. Right now, both fear and desire are stronger than ever inside them. The desire gently pulls them toward connection, warmth, familiarity, and the comfort they once felt with you. At the same time, fear keeps pulling them in the opposite direction, trying to protect them from vulnerability and possible disappointment. But something important is beginning to happen. For the first time, there are moments when the desire feels stronger than the fear. Those moments may be brief, but they matter. They create an emotional pressure that is becoming harder to ignore. It feels like a quiet storm that rises and settles depending on the memories, the silence, and the thoughts moving through their mind. They are not at peace while living in this hesitation, not because they do not care, but because they are caught inside a deep emotional conflict that keeps leading them toward the same unanswered question. This is no longer only about the connection between two people. It has become part of how they see themselves. It touches their identity, their emotional growth, and the kind of person they are slowly becoming. And that is why this process feels so much bigger than it first appeared. At its heart, this moment is about personal change. It asks whether they will remain the person they were before this connection, or allow themselves to become someone more open, more aware, and more emotionally honest. Even if they seem distant or unsettled on the outside right now, Do not mistake that for the end of the story. Something much deeper is happening beneath the surface. They are beginning to realize that living in this exhausting middle ground, where they are neither fully present nor completely gone, has slowly taken away their peace. It has become heavier than they expected. They are being pushed inward, closer to their own truth, and slowly learning that they cannot avoid responsibility for what they genuinely feel forever. They are starting to understand that holding on to old emotional habits comes with its own cost. The familiar safety they once relied on now feels limiting instead of comforting. Something inside them is changing. It is no longer quiet or gentle. It has become steady, active, and impossible to ignore. If you can sense this shift too, stay until the end, because there is still one more important piece to understand, even in complete silence, when no words are spoken. What once felt like protection now feels more like a prison to them. The hesitation they depended on for so long is no longer keeping them safe. Instead, it has started trapping them inside emotions they can no longer escape. The walls they carefully built around themselves are beginning to crack beneath the weight of everything they tried to avoid. They remember moments when they stayed silent, even though they wanted to speak. They see how pride replaced honesty and how avoidance slowly replaced truth. The distance between what they truly feel and what they actually do keeps becoming smaller. That creates pressure, but it also creates clarity. Real change is no longer simply possible. It is becoming necessary. When someone spends enough time alone with their own thoughts, the truth begins rising on its own. It does not need outside pressure. It comes from within. That is exactly what is happening inside them now. This shift is not being created by another person or outside influence. It is growing from something deep within them that becomes stronger with each passing day. They can no longer depend on uncertainty the way they once did. Everything they pushed aside is slowly becoming impossible to ignore. If these words reflect what they are experiencing, then a deeper awareness has already started forming inside them. Distractions are no longer enough to silence it. The connection keeps returning during their quietest moments. It appears when life slows down. It comes back while they focus on work, daily routines, or other people. And every time those thoughts return, they help them understand things a little more clearly. What once seemed random now feels like a pattern. What once felt confusing now carries meaning, even if they cannot fully explain it yet. They are beginning to understand something that changes everything. They were not only missing you, they were also missing the version of themselves that existed while they were connected to you. That version felt more honest, more open, more emotionally alive. Being separated from that part of themselves has become painful in a way they can no longer overlook. This marks a major turning point in their inner journey, because now the question is no longer whether the connection mattered. The real question is whether they are ready to face what that connection revealed about who they truly are. As this awareness continues growing, the outside world slowly loses some of its influence over them. They can still stay busy. They can still fill their schedule with work, responsibilities, people, and routines. But beneath all of that, the same quiet pull remains. It keeps leading them back to the same place. Back to you. Back to everything that was never fully resolved. This is the stage where the protective part of them slowly begins losing its control. That protective side always chooses distance, because distance feels safer. It prefers certainty over emotional risk. But now a deeper understanding is beginning to replace that old belief. They are realizing that staying disconnected creates its own kind of pain. Sometimes that emptiness becomes heavier than the fear of getting close. Because of that, they now stand between two possible futures. One feels familiar, comfortable, and emotionally empty. The other feels uncertain, but it carries the possibility of something genuine and deeply meaningful. For the first time, the unknown no longer feels impossible. It begins to feel more valuable than the safety they have held onto for so long. This is where real courage quietly starts taking shape. Fear has not disappeared, but the truth is finally becoming more important than the fear itself. As this shift continues, a calm stillness slowly settles inside them. The emotional pressure remains, But it no longer feels chaotic. It feels steadier. It feels more honest. And little by little, it begins leading them toward the answer they have been avoiding for far too long. It feels calmer than it did before. The emotional storm has not completely disappeared, but it is no longer controlling every thought the way it once did. They are slowly stopping the habit of pushing every feeling away the moment it appears. Instead, they are beginning to let themselves experience those emotions without instantly shutting them down. That small change is more powerful than it seems. It allows them to accept that what they feel is genuine, and that acceptance brings a quiet kind of peace, not because every problem has been solved, but because the inner battle is slowly turning into understanding. They now stand at the edge of the person they used to be, looking toward a version of themselves they cannot fully recognize yet. Only one choice stands between those two lives, and it is a choice they cannot avoid forever. Stay with this because the next part reveals why this moment carries so much emotional weight. This has become a time of deep reflection and honest self-examination. The silence surrounding them is no longer empty. It has become a mirror reflecting their own heart back to them. It shows them where pride stood in the way of love. It shows them where fear replaced honesty. It reveals where avoiding difficult emotions created distance that never truly needed to exist. Memories continue returning, but now they are seen through different eyes. Conversations, small expressions, shared moments, quiet pauses, they all carry a deeper meaning than they once did. This is no longer only about looking back with regret. It is about finally recognizing what truly matters. The things they once valued above emotional connection, such as staying in control, protecting their image, or hiding behind emotional walls, no longer bring the comfort they once did. Instead, those things now feel strangely empty when compared to something real, meaningful, and emotionally alive. That realization changes more than they expected. Another quiet change has also started happening inside them. Their ability to understand someone else's feelings has grown stronger. They are beginning to imagine what the distance may have felt like from your side. They are starting to recognize the emotional weight that may have been carried silently without being spoken aloud. That kind of understanding softens a person from the inside. It makes emotional avoidance much harder to continue. Once true responsibility enters the heart, everything begins shifting naturally. They are no longer reacting only from fear or self-protection. Instead, they are becoming more aware of the part they played in everything that happened. That awareness changes the meaning of every future decision. It does not create loud emotions or dramatic scenes. It creates something quieter, but much more serious. They understand that whatever they choose next will say something important about the person they are becoming. If this feels familiar, keep watching, because this is where everything begins changing from the inside out. The final layers of hesitation are slowly falling away. Words like maybe, someday, or what if are losing their power. In their place, something much stronger is beginning to grow. A quiet sense of urgency that refuses to stay ignored. There is an increasing feeling that they must finally acknowledge what is true. They must face their emotions instead of continuing to hide from them. They must stop living in the same emotional cycle that keeps repeating itself without bringing peace. Even time feels different to them now. It no longer feels endless. It feels valuable. It feels limited. They are beginning to understand that remaining stuck is also a choice, and over time it may become the most painful one of all. This realization is not only happening in their thoughts, they feel it physically too. It appears as pressure in the chest, a racing heartbeat, or a deep tension whenever they imagine speaking honestly or reaching out. The unknown still brings fear. But now the familiar emptiness of staying disconnected feels even heavier. That is why movement no longer feels impossible. Thoughts they buried are returning naturally. Actions they once believed they could never take are becoming harder to resist. Because when the truth grows strong enough, silence stops feeling safe. It starts becoming uncomfortable, and eventually impossible to carry. Remember this carefully. Whatever happens next will not come from a sudden emotional impulse. It will come from a long journey of finally facing themselves without hiding anymore. That is why this moment carries such lasting importance. It is not temporary. It is not a passing feeling that disappears after a few days. It is a deep inner change that slowly transforms the way a person sees life, relationships, and themselves. At first the change is almost invisible, then it grows stronger, and finally it reaches a point where everything becomes clear at once. At the center of this journey, one truth remains unchanged. You awakened something inside them that refuses to disappear. You helped them reconnect with a part of themselves they had almost forgotten. You reflected back a version of who they could be, more open, more honest, and more emotionally alive. In that way, you became a reminder of what genuine emotional connection feels like. Even during silence, your influence never truly left them. It stayed in the background, following them into their quietest thoughts. And now that the outside noise is becoming quieter, your impact is becoming easier for them to recognize. Little by little, the confusion is fading away. What remains feels stronger, steadier, and much harder to deny.